Well, yeah, Tony was here for a reason this morning, other than to say hi to me, I guess. But Tony Marino is going to testify this morning, a wonderful brother that we've known for many years now, and I'm sure we're going to hear some amazing things from the Lord this morning.
Well, good morning to everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tony Marino. My real name is actually Antonino Marino Jr., and I am the son of Antonino Marino Sr. and Beverly Williams. And the reason I mention my family, my mother and my father, is because that's where I began. The main thing that's helped me, of course, in my journey, my struggle, and that's what I'll call it. I say that because I think a lot of us can relate to a struggle. My struggle starts pretty early in life. My father and mother divorced by the time I was 2.5 years old. My mother raised me and my brother Ben, who goes by Ben, whose real name is Biagio Marino. We grew up for a very short period of time in a single parent family. God steps in. I'm sure he stepped in long before that, but he steps in at that time and brings somebody new into my mother's life who was a true blessing to my brother's life and mine. His name was Barry Hewitt, and he was my father. He loved us, he took care of us, he watched over us, he corrected us, but he was a man's man, and he took care of my mother, he took care of my brother, and he took care of me as if we were his own kids. By the time I was 7, prior to that, my mother had been raised Catholic, and my father had been raised Protestant. And at that point, my mother wanted to start going to church with my father. So we started going to a Presbyterian church in Brandon, Florida. That's where we lived at the time. And at the age of 7, I first heard the plan of salvation from our pastor back then. His name was Bob Gerstofferson, and it was a little Presbyterian church. And at 7 years old, I realized that I was a sinner. When most kids maybe are thinking about cartoons or playing baseball or whatever else, I realized I was a sinner. And I accepted Christ, I'll say the first time. I don't know how everybody else does it, but I've accepted Christ so many times during the course of my life, it's not even funny, because I was always terrified that I was going to be left behind, or I wouldn't spend the rest of eternity with Jesus. So at 7, I realized that I needed Christ. I've always had this thing that I knew that I was a sinner, and I can't really tell you where that comes from. I believe it would probably have something to do going back to my parents again. My mother was divorced before she even met my father. My father had been divorced a couple of times before he met my mother. And this isn't to cast aspersions on them. I love them both dearly. But I knew something was wrong. I knew something was not right. And like I said, at an early age, I really realized that I needed somebody to step in. I needed help. My parents, like I said, had a difficult life themselves, and I think that's one reason that as I go down this, you'll understand why I don't have any grudges or anything else, because I went back and looked at who my grandfather was. My father was an immigrant from Sicily, and they came during turn of the century. He was first generation here. He had gotten off the boat with his grandfather, his father, and it was rough. It was very difficult. They were tough people. He had a very difficult upbringing himself. My mother ran away from home by the time she was 13. My mother had been married actually prior, as I said. She got married the first time at 14 years old. And, she at some point later in my life told me that story. And it was a very rough story. It was a lot of physical abuse, a lot of pain and suffering, a lot of it. As I said, at 7 years old, I first raised my hand in a Presbyterian church in Brandon, Florida, and realized I needed Christ. Had a very nice childhood. My father, my Barry Hewitt, who had adopted us, raised us, took care of us. He advanced. He was a very educated man. He had a couple master's degrees in economics and business. He became vice president of a company called Seaboard Coastline there in Tampa, Florida. And we had a pretty nice life. We bought the house in the suburbs, brand new house built for us. We had 2 cars. Life was pretty good, especially being from the beginnings that we had started with. By this time, around 8 years old, even though we had this amazing father, this person who was always there for us, who was always caring for us, me and my brother started to grow some serious resentment towards our biological father. We were very upset that why didn't he want us? Why was he the way he was? My mother had attempted a couple of times to bring us to him. It was always labored. He would either not show up or not be there. Or when he would leave us with his new girlfriend or wife and take off. And we were pretty miffed at him, to say the least. And at that point, anger started to grow, I believe, pretty substantially in me and my brother's hearts. I know that for me, that was the beginning of something that would take me down a path that was not a good path for the rest of my life, which I can say is not a good path for anybody. But I started to become resentful. I remember at a very young age, around 4, one time when my mother had brought me to my dad. I remember him being upset and picking me up in the air by both arms and looking at me from about 6, 7, about this far away, 6, 7 inches, and telling me, basically screaming at me, "I never wanted you anyway," and throwing me across the room. Luckily, I landed on a bed and bounced and rolled onto the floor. But that was something that stuck with me and stuck with my brother for for a very, 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 very long time. It was a seed, I'll call it a seed that was planted at that time. And over time, that seed started to germinate and grow. Even though I had a lot of great things going on in my life, I had a wonderful stepfather. My mother was always extremely loving, strict, but extremely loving and very protective of me and my brother. And that started to grow. At the age of about 8.5, my father and mother wanted to go to a Bible conference. Our pastor, Bob Gustafson, was having one in Hollywood, Florida. There was a college there called Florida Bible College, which was a huge college. It had something like 6,000 students. It was an actual college. There were dorms. There were, family housing. So we went down there for this Bible conference. Stayed right on the beach there. We had one of the most wonderful times. We jumped in the pool and ran around on the beach and just had a wonderful time. We were there for a full week. We went back to Tampa or Brandon area. And a month later, my dad, unbeknownst to me and my brother, said, "We're going to move to Hollywood. And I'm going to quit my job, and I am going to go to seminary school. I'm going to become a pastor." So at that point, we had all of our friends in our neighborhood, and, we had a very, very, very nice life. And so what happened at that point, we sold our house. We had 2 cars, and we sold one, and we moved to Hollywood, Florida. And when we first moved there, I had my own room as a kid in Brandon, and my brother did. We lived in a 4-bedroom house, and a big backyard. We moved into a 1-bedroom apartment, the 4 of us, and I was all of a sudden starting to think, well, this whole God thing is not really going the way I wanted it to go. Me and my brother had the bedroom. We slept on a rollaway bed that we folded up during the day and put up against the wall so we could use that space. My parents slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. So that was the beginning of seminary. And, we lived there for about a year. Things did get better. We actually got into family housing at Florida Bible College. And, we never had our own room again, unfortunately. Matter of fact, I don't think we ever had a separate bed until I moved out, because my parents started having more children again. But that was the beginning, and me and my brother were a little bothered. We were a little, and as I said earlier, that seed of anger was always being nourished. It was always being cultivated to some extent. That was another little bit of fertilizer that was put on our seed. As time went on, we kind of acclimated, and we were living on the beach. So there were I'm not painting a doom and gloom, but little by little, and I think none of us get there just one day, bam. I think we all have, whatever your seed is, we all have these seeds that get nourished over time and grow if we let them. So as time went on, my dad's going to school, and my father, as I said before, was a very learned man, very educated man, very capable man, he became very popular with the school and did very well there. He finished like second or third in his class of like 800 or something like that. Was able to read Latin. We would go and listen to him preach at various places while he was still in school there. And we slowly, even though our family was moving closer and closer to God, me and my brother were becoming more and more angry. And again, not with my stepfather, not with my mother. We were just becoming angry. We felt, we had been there now. Our biological father had never reached out to us, had never, why doesn't he call? At least on my birthday he'll call, or on Christmas I'll get something in the mail. And as I said, year by year went by, and he didn't call. He didn't send a letter. He didn't send a package. So we became progressively a little bit more angry. The one part that I've omitted from this story is that on top of that, I am severely dyslexic. Not a little bit, but there's some 64 different versions of dyslexia. When I was in the military, I was tested. I almost hit the jackpot. I almost have them all. So that added to my anger as a kid as well. My younger brother could read, he could write, he could spell. His older brother, who had been touted as, according to my mother, the second coming of Christ, turned into be kind of a dud. And it was a very frustrating thing. That was another thing that made me angry as well. And at that time, nobody knew what dyslexia was. We're talking, late 60s, early 70s. Nobody really knew what it was. They couldn't even diagnose. I was told that I was lazy, that I didn't want to apply myself. And I promised people that I was really, trust me, I was really trying hard. I was the kid in second grade that would, when reading time came around, and it was very elementary. It was like run, spot, run, see Jane run, that kind of thing. I would put my head down on the desk, and so they wouldn't call on me. Or when they would call on me, I would cry. And then I would hear laughing noises, these cute little laughing noises. And they're kids. I mean, now I look back, and they were kids. They were laughing at me. And again, my seed grew a little more. I knew I didn't want that. I knew I didn't want people making fun of me. I knew I didn't want to have this affliction that I had. So this whole time, this seed is growing again. So I was always a very athletic young man. I grew quicker than most. Believe it or not, by the time I was 12, I was as tall as I am now. They thought I was going to be like 6'5". Unfortunately, the joke was on me. I never grew another inch. But at a very early age, I was the biggest kid in school. And I was a pretty good athlete in just about everything. So when this laughing would occur, I fixed that. I learned how to fix things. And it grew out of my anger, and there was a new element that was introduced. It was fear. And so when I would be fearful that people would laugh at me, and then when it did, or smirk, or whatever, and that's where anger really started to really work itself in me, because I would be generally sitting in the front of the class because that's where the dope set, the guys with the big thing on the top of their head. And the truth is, in those areas, I just couldn't get it. So I had a patented move. I would just, in class, if something like that happened, I would just turn around and I would look at them. And I would look right through them. And I would mouth a cute little thing, "I'll see you after class. I'll see you after class." So that went on for a while, and the laughing stopped. The laughing totally just went away. And then there was a new element. Again, not only was I fearful of people laughing at me and anger, but now I had a new element. I made people fearful. That was my, and it worked. It worked. Well, at least it seemed it worked at the time. It worked. You know, that's Tony Lee. Don't say anything, you know. Because I could not, and this is part of being so fearful, I could not let anything go because I thought if I let one little iota go, that they would tear me apart. I could never show anything other than this angry, determined person. I could never show that to anybody. If I showed anything less than that, I probably would have just disappeared at that time. And unfortunately, the anger just kept growing and growing and growing. My father then graduated from Florida Bible College, and he became a pastor of a church. And I sat literally right there. That's where I sat. My brother sat next to me, my mother sat there, and by that time, we had a new sister. Well, I love my sisters dearly, Dawn, Hope, and I have another brother, Timothy. I also come from a very large extended family, which I'll get into in just a second. But when Dawn came, as adorable as she was, because I was so angry, I wasn't happy she was here. I'm 12 years older than my sister who came afterwards. And our life, and this is a very selfish thing, but when you're fearful, selfish is just a hop, skip, and a jump away. Our life had changed so dramatically from where we lived in Tampa. Now we lived in an apartment. I was sleeping in the same bed with my brother, who was a fidgety little fart as a kid. He kicked me all night long. He made noises. So, it was not good. So when my sister came along, it meant more work. It meant less for us. Very selfish. I loved her to death. I thought she was amazing, but we definitely resented her. And my dad started a church. And that meant we were going to be there Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening, and then on Friday, we had spaghetti dinners at our place. So my life now has become totally immersed in something that I definitely, not saying that I didn't want to be a part of, but I didn't want it shoved down my throat, especially now, roughly around the age of 10 or 11. And felt like I was being bombarded with it. I mean, my father's sermons were amazing, but I would sit there and just go, when will this be over? When will this stop? Why do I have to do this? And I just remember being more and more and more angry. I loved my family dearly, and I know that might sound contradictory, but as another one came along, Hope came along, my next sister, about 2 years later, and me and my brother grew angry. We loved them, but we were looking at our parents going, what are you doing? I mean, actually, you didn't talk back to my mom. I told you earlier, she was very strict. But me and my brother actually said, what are you guys doing? Why are you doing this? Because it wasn't like our economics was getting better. If anything, it was maybe getting a little worse. And we were bringing more mouths in, and more responsibility, and more this and more that. And I was really mad. We would never show it to our parents. We'd never do that. But inside, that seed again was growing. And again, when my brother Timothy was born, we were pretty livid. We started to act out. And I say we, I mean me and my brother. Small things, not big things, but small things, because my parents didn't play around. I mean, my mother is from Louisiana, from the South. She would have you go pick a switch off of a tree. She'd have you pick your switch, and then you'd get that on your legs and all that great stuff. So Beverly didn't mess around. And my dad, like as I said earlier, was a tough guy. Very kind guy, very loving guy. But he was truly the guy that when you were at school and somebody said, my dad will beat up your dad, and went, no, that won't happen. My dad will tie your dad in a knot, which he truly could have. He was that impressive of a human being in the sense of physically. He was a true specimen. But we kept growing angrier and angrier. And it was little by little. We started acting out. We're probably around 13 or 14. Of course, my dyslexia is now, when you're in elementary school, junior high, you can kind of hide it a little bit. You can kind of skirt by. There's no classes at this time. When you get to high school, you're exposed. So my thing was, I'm gonna, for my 12th birthday, I begged my parents to get me a weight set. Because I said, I'm not going to get any smarter. I mean, that's the way I looked at it. I'm not going to be able to do this, and this is only going to get worse as time goes on, as I approach high school. So I made myself as opposing person as could be possible. So to keep going on with what I said earlier, I had to be able to inflict my will on you if you came against me. If you came against me, you said something about me, I had no choice. At least that's the way it seemed in my mind. I was going to come and get you. I was going to hurt you. I was going to make you. Really what all I wanted people to stop. I wanted them to leave me alone. And the only way I could figure out to make them leave me alone was to make them scared of me. And the truth is, the whole time, it's so weird that, and I know a lot of people that I've talked to or counseled with or whatever over the years that were similar to me, we're all scared. So it all came out of me being scared originally of somebody making fun of me or hurting my feelings or whatever. So out of that, I created fear to make them fearful of me. And that's what most people who are bad people or violent people, they're really terrified. It's like a dog. When a dog is barking at you, the dog doesn't want to necessarily bite you. The dog is saying, I'm scared of you. Get away from me. Stay away from me. Don't come close to me. I'm barking at you. I'm showing you my teeth. Stay away from me. Leave me alone. They don't necessarily really want to bite you. And, that's what me and my younger brother, to some extent, had tried to perfect. As life went on, I went into the ninth grade. I remember, even in the ninth grade, I remember putting my head down on desk. I remember going into English class and, hearing, this is what a pronoun is, this is what, all of these things. And I'm just like, none of this makes any sense to me. I don't understand it. They had me hooked on phonics. They had me clapping to sound out words and syllables and everything there was possible to do. And at home, I would desperately try to read and to spell, and to no avail. And this started to, again, just feed that anger even more. My father became a very well-known pastor. And we as a family, like I said, would sit right there, minimum of 3 times a week. And as me and my brother got older, we really just got angrier and angrier and more rebellious. We wouldn't do it ever in church. We knew we had a role to play, and we played our role while we were there. When we weren't there, I was constantly at this point, I'm in high school, late part of junior, literally in fights every day. I'm not saying, I was in fights every day and had one in all of junior high. Literally, I was in a fight every day. Somebody, and my brother, was very nice to me. He gave me double duty. He would actually go, "Oh yeah? Well, my brother's Tony Marino. He'll see you after school today." So so it wasn't just, my own problems that I was making, my own bad decisions that I was making, and they were all bad decisions. My brother was volunteering me at least twice a week, and again, you go back to my mom from the South. You look after your brother. If something happens to him, you'll be talking to me. And I knew what that meant. So I again, even more angry. I really lived on this diet of anger and fear, anger and fear, anger and fear. I get into the 10th grade after the whole 9th grade, first year of high school, and the counselors call my dad. And you got to remember, this guy's got 2 master's degrees, one in economics and business. He finished top of his class in seminary school. Very learned man, very educated man. And they call him in and they say, we think it's better for Tony to maybe go to a vocational school or something like that. We can't help him. We can't help Tony. And it hurt my dad, and that hurt me, because he would always say, "There's something about you're smart in this, you're good in this, you're good in that. Why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z?" And I think he always thought that looking back at it now, I would say, how could you not have seen that I just couldn't do this? But he was hurt, and because he was hurt, because I cared so much about him, I was hurt. And I just said, okay, yeah, I'll quit school. So, I graduated the 9th grade, if that's what you really want to call it. In the beginning of the 10th grade, like I said, I quit school. So I think I'm around 14 or 15 right now. This is where life starts to change dramatically for me. I get a job. I'm doing construction. I come home every day covered in cement. I'm doing masonry work. I'm the guy who's mixing the cement. I'm the guy who's lifting the wheelbarrows and putting them on, 6-inch planks, walking up a thing. And I'm angry again because I'm like, all my friends are in school. All of them are, I'm doing this. In some ways, I took it and I mean, quasi enjoyed it because I was earning money and this and that. But again, I'd get up at 4 or 5 in the morning. I'd have a truck that back then you could drive at the age of 15. And my job was to pick up guys in the morning and take them to a job site. So I had to, this is before, MapQuest and all that stuff. So I would sit around and drive to all these places, pick these guys up in the morning, go to the job site, work there. I also was the gopher, so if something needed to be picked up, I went out and got it. And then my job was to drop all these guys off, and then I got to go home. And that was 5 days a week. And when I got home, I mean, I was truly exhausted every day. I don't know, many of you know about South Florida, but it is a very humid and hot place most of the year. And I worked in that every day as a young man from the age of 15 till I was 17 years old when I went into the military. I was very angry, again. It just kept getting worse and worse. Now I'm thrown into the world, though, of grown men. So even though I might have been, the big fish in the pond in high school and junior high, now I'm dealing with grown men. And this is at 15. It could have, don't get me wrong, there were people there who were kind and this and that, but there were also some pretty bad dudes. So things did not necessarily get better for me there. Again, I became even more angry and then more fearful because now I was in a situation that I wasn't sure that I could control anymore. Because this guy might be able to hurt me. I might not be able to, I might have to listen to what this guy says to me. And I might not be able to retaliate and then be back where I was and go, even though that was a miserable place to be, that was unconscionable. Then I came home one day shortly after my 16th birthday, and unbeknownst to me, my parents told me that I was moving out. I had just come home covered in cement, filthy, and up until the day my mom died, she still felt terrible about everything that had happened. And it's kind of a long, drawn-out story, and it's not really necessary. Long story short was, here's $50, pack your stuff up, you can't live here anymore. And I was like, what did I was like, and literally I was bawling, I was in tears. I got down on my knees and begged my mother and father to please let me stay. Don't take me away from my brothers and sisters. I'll whatever you want me to do, I'll do. It wasn't like I was going out and I never drank, I never smoked, I never did drugs, I never did any of those things. But my parents wanted me, and it might sound mundane, it might sound silly, but they wanted me to still do all the chores that I had at the house. And I tried to explain to them that I couldn't do everything in that day. And I knew that there were some problems between my mom and dad at that time. And I know that that was the real answer. What was going on is in most things I've learned in life, when you're having problems, or somebody is coming against you and you don't know why, it has nothing to do with you. It really has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with what's going on in their life. And sometimes you get, sometimes you're the bug and sometimes you're the windshield. That day I was the windshield. And I literally, like I said, got on my hands and I was a sloppy mess. I mean, those cries where snot's coming out of your nose and that one, I don't think I had done that one since I was probably 3 or 4. But my family was being ripped away from me. My brothers and sisters were, and I was supposed to be quiet and just take it and go. And I did. And that anger and that fear, now I'm all on my own. I'm 16 years old. I'm in South Florida. I've got $50 in my pocket. I probably had like $120 in the bank, in my bank account. And there's no cell phones. I mean, literally, it would be like going out this door and saying, hey, go out there, and don't come back. And I had that $50 in my hand. This is back in the day. I walked up the street, and my boss, I called him and said, hey, is there any place I can stay tonight? And he goes, well, Jim, one of the guys you pick up in the morning, his roommate moved out. Maybe, here's Jim's number. So I'm writing it down on something. And of course, being dyslexic, I get the numbers backwards. So I call Jim and it doesn't work. So I got to call my boss again. And, he gives me the number, and finally I get in touch with Jim. And Jim says, yeah, you can stay with me. We'll see how it goes for a couple of days. And we'll see how it goes. But tonight you have a place to sleep. And I go, okay. So it may sound weird. I wasn't mad at my parents, though. I was sad. There's a difference, because I love my parents. I wasn't mad at them. I was really sad. I didn't necessarily understand, but I wasn't mad at them. I wanted to be back in their company. I wanted to be back around them. But I was angry about the situation. And I'm thinking, this whole God thing and this and that. I mean, I never went, God, you're bad for doing this to me. As a matter of fact, in all the mishaps, I've never gone, oh, God, why are you doing this to me? I've always understood, as I said in the very beginning of this, that I was a sinner. Even at that very young age of 7, I knew that I wasn't getting my full measure of what I deserved. I know that. So, I mean, I'm being serious. I always knew that I wasn't getting what I deserved. I always got some lesser degree. Nevertheless, that lesser degree was always excruciating, because it was, So I start to, of course, I'm not going to church anymore. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to survive, how I'm going to make it through this. And I have no contact with my family. And after about 2 weeks, I call, and my mom says, if you want to come over next Sunday, you can come over for dinner. And I mean, literally, I was like, it was like Christmas, birthday, everything rolled into one, because I was going to get to be there. And in the back of my mind, I was like, well, they're going to let me stay. They're going to see me, and we're going to hold hands or sing Kumbaya and all that, and everything's going to be all right. And I went there for dinner, had a great time, and then it was time to leave. And I was living with one of the guys there, and then he got arrested for possession of drugs. So he didn't have the apartment anymore, so I didn't have an apartment anymore. So I found a little tiny place in Brandon. And at that time, I said, I think it was $30 a week at that time, which wasn't a tremendous amount of money, but it was one room with a sink no toilet, and there was a shower and a toilet at the end of the hall that like 20 people. And I did that, and I would sit in this bed looking up at night. I almost never slept. And just praying to God that help me, bring my family back to me. Bring all these things back into my life. Help me. I wasn't angry at God. I just would ask him, please help me, help me, help me, help me. And it kept going that way. And I was more fearful, more angry. From time to time, I would be quite violent, which was a vicious circle. At that point, the hostages were taken. And my dad actually drove over to my little flop house and said, you know what you should do? He said, when you're 17, you can join the army. And he said, there's probably going to be a draft. You probably should just join the army, get in there, get a job, get a non-combat job. Get a non-combat job, and you'll be okay. At least you'll have something. You'll have a place to live. They'll give you food. They'll this and that. And it was a great conversation, and it was the most heartbreaking conversation because what he was really saying was, "You're never coming back here." He wanted good for me. He wanted all this, but he was saying, "You've got to go out. You're not coming back here." And so that's what I did. And I went into the military. Of course, I didn't get a non-combat job. I, of course, chose a very extreme combat job. Again, not listening. Again, bad decision. Went into the military, and that only made things, I'm not going to say necessarily worse, because the military was good for me in a lot of different ways. It did discipline me. It did teach me how to work with others. It did teach me a bunch of things. It did not teach me how to resolve issues other than the way I already knew. It maybe made me a little bit more resigned to the idea if something or someone is not complying or doing what you want them to do, you use violence and you make them stop. So in a way, I was already on this path. I was just reinforcing it to a large extent. And I went all over the world and did a lot of crazy stuff. Stuff that I know was necessary. But now in hindsight, I wish I hadn't had to be a part of that. I love serving my country. I served with a lot of great people. I lost a lot of friends the time I was there. And again, angrier, more fearful. And I kept calling out to God periodically. I'm not going to tell you every day it was, hey, God, help me out. It wasn't. There was a point that's the point where I started to distance myself. It wasn't like I was rejecting God. It was just like, where do I put you in, God? Where do you work? Or how are you going to fit into my life? I met a girl in Germany, and very nice person, very kind person, very loving person. Thought I was the cat's meow. And she was very good to me, very kind to me, looked after me in every way. And we were together for about 5 years, and she had to go back to Europe We were stateside. We were living actually then in Hawaii was my base station. And again, like I said, this person, her name was Evelyn. She was always there for me in every way. And she said, I've got to go back to Europe. There's things going on in my family, and I've got to go back there for a couple of months. And I was like, no, don't do that. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. Again, even though I knew that this person had done all these things for me, had been there for me, had cared for me, truly had my best interest at heart, was a person that would sacrifice for me, she had to go someplace, but my thoughts were, don't leave me alone. Don't leave me alone. Now, why would I be saying that? Why would I be saying, don't leave me alone? And the reason that I was saying, don't leave me alone, is because I was terrified. And, the things that happened earlier in my life made me have, your dad, you still haven't heard from my biological father as of yet. So been abandoned. Your parents tell you at 16 you got to leave. And you think you've got this thing all sewed up, or at least you're functioning. And this person says, I got to go back. And all I'm saying is, I don't care about what problems she has, honestly, because I'm very selfish. All I'm saying to her is, don't leave me. Don't leave me here by myself. Now, I'm constantly, from there, I'm flying missions to the Philippines. I'm in Guam. I'm in a bunch of different areas. So it's just Hawaii was just my home base, but I'm flying out on stuff, on sorties and stuff all the time. But I'm saying, don't leave me alone. Evelyn, don't do this. Have them come here. We'll buy the ticket. Have them. She goes, I can't. I've got to do this. So she leaves. I'm okay for about 30 minutes. I know you thought I was going to say 3 days or 3 weeks, but I'm okay for about 30 minutes. And the fear that's come over me, being alone again, is terrifying to me. Being by myself is just all-consuming. I have nothing. I mean, that's the way I looked at it. I had nothing. And I knew everything. Like I said again, at the age of 7, I knew I was a sinner. And I immediately, probably within a couple of days, had already found somebody new. Somebody who didn't care about me, who could care less about me, but thought I was either cute or, whatever she thought, and she was there. And I was terrified, again, fear factored hugely, because I've done something to somebody who's never harmed a hair on my head, has only cared about me, has only loved me. And I'm going to have to tell this person what I've done. And I'm, of course, disgusted with myself and loathing myself, which is another friend of anger and fear. And she comes back, and she knows something's wrong with me. She can just tell something's up. And I just say, yeah, I did this and this and this. And she was terribly upset, rightfully so. As I said before, this was a person that only cared about me, only loved me. And I started to understand that at that point that I had never felt loved. And that might sound weird because I've got a wife, I had a family early on, but that was what I really thought. I thought my dad didn't love me. My parents must not have loved me because They told me I had to go. And I thought, and I do know that this person did actually love me, but I had built a wall. I had built a wall around me so that I could, whoever was, they could have, given me anything in the world, but because of that wall, I wouldn't let them in. Even though I desperately wanted to be loved, desperately wanted to be loved. But I had built myself a little prison that I couldn't feel that love. I couldn't obtain it. So I was in it was a vicious cycle, a vicious place that I had put myself in. And now I put this person into this. I apologized to her. I tried to explain to her, what I was going through, which that in itself was, more devastating, I think, again, to this is who you really are. You're a weak, selfish, terrified person. That's who you are. And that was everything I tried to build a persona against. I didn't want anybody to know I was weak. I didn't want anybody to know that I was selfish, that I was all these other things. And that, lastly, I wasn't loved. Or at least or I was unlovable. Maybe it's not these people. Because if you have, a common occurrence that happens over and over and over again in your life, you go, well, maybe it's not them. Maybe it's me. And that's a pretty good place to start when you keep running into the same wall. Maybe it's not the wall's fault. Maybe it's your fault. And again, that was a realization. I sat there. She told me, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go back to Europe. And again, this is how crazy you are and how fearful you are. Don't go. Don't go. Don't go. And it wasn't don't go. I'm just being honest with you. It wasn't don't go because I cared. I didn't want her to go because I'd be alone again. That's the truth. I could have said, oh, yeah, no, I really love you. And I did care about her tremendously. To this day, we are still very, very good friends. I think a bunch of you have met her. She's been here a couple of times. But I was saying don't go because I was still terrified. I still hadn't gotten it straightened out with God. So I went through military, did 8 years in there. Like I said, went all over the world. Got out, was going to go back to South Florida. This is 1987, so I'm dating myself. And I had to ETS here from California, here in Los Angeles. So flew from Hawaii to here. They put me up in a hotel here for like 5 days because my car was being shipped from Hawaii, and I would pick it up, and then I would go do all my ETS paperwork. So I had some friends here, and I called some of them up and ran around town, and then I called my brother, and I said, what's the weather like back home? I'm going to be coming home in probably a week or so. I'll drive back. And he said, well, it's just incredibly humid this summer. It's 90 and it's 100% this. And I remember as a kid, in that bed sleeping next to Mr. Fidget, and it would just be no air conditioning, and we'd sweat all night together. And I was like, And then I met, while I was here, I met a girl, and everybody's saying, well, why don't you stay? Why don't you? I'd be like, no, California, are you crazy? This place, I'd never stay here. Now I'm here 33 years, of course. But I wound up staying, and I was still lost, extremely lost. And probably the worst place to be lost. Maybe Vegas might be a little worse, but I think this might be one of the worst cities to be lost. Or it could be a blessing. I don't know. Maybe, I do know that pain is a great precursor to change. When you have enough pain, you change. That being said, if you have experienced a lot of pain, it's like in the gym, if you've learned to lift heavy weights, your muscles get bigger so you can withstand those heavy weights a little bit more. And I had learned to withstand pain. I had learned that this is a fact of life. You've prepared yourself your whole life to endure pain. So if you have the ability to endure more pain, you're not going to make that change. And I certainly wasn't ready to make that change yet either, because I had no answer. I knew God was the answer. I didn't know how God was the answer, but I knew God was the answer. And it wasn't that I was, no, God, I'm not doing it your way. It wasn't that. It was just I was so immersed in me that there wasn't enough room for God at that point. I'll skip ahead a little bit. I met my second wife. We got married, and I was doing very well. I had gotten into the gym business. I was doing extremely well. I was making a couple $100,000 a year. This is probably 1995, which was a lot of dough back then. I had about 6 trainers that were working for me. And then I had gotten some notoriety, and the NBA came knocking at my door. I worked for the Clippers basketball team as their strength and conditioning coach, and then I worked for the Indiana Pacers with Coach Larry Brown, who was my benefactor in all of that. And I was making more money. And I had some notoriety. I did some TV shows, some interviews on sports stations, and all of this kind of stuff. And that didn't help my situation. You always think, well, if I make X amount of money, or I get this, if I get that, I'm going to be okay. You're going to be all right. You're going to be... And the truth is, if you're an angry, scared person, and you get more money, you don't become a fearless person, and you don't become a kind person. You actually become more so of what you already are. It's like if you're an alcoholic and you win the lottery, you don't generally quit drinking. You have unlimited funds or drugs or whatever it is. I mean, everybody's got a thing. But you don't normally go, oh, okay, I got it now. I got it. I'm going to stop. And I certainly didn't either. And, it's so funny even saying this, because I thought this out kind of how I was going to say it, and it's coming out a lot different than I originally planned it. But the truth is, I did the same thing again. So I went to Indiana. I told my wife at that time, I said, I want you to move to Indiana with me. I'm going to be there 8 months out of the year, blah, blah, blah. She had a successful real estate business here. And I said, forget about that. And then I played a guilt trip. I put you through school. I did this. I did that. you got to come with me, we'll start it there, or you can do, we'll come back here, you can do it part of the year here, part of the year there. Of course, again, this is me saying, I'm scared, don't leave me alone. Don't leave me alone. Because I'm thinking about me again, which I always thought of. And she said, and at that time she was pregnant with Nino. And I said, you really should come, I got a great place here. The team is, the Simon brothers are taking great care of us. It's ridiculous. They've given me 4 first-class tickets during the course of the year for us to go back and forth. So you could, I tried to sell it, and she said, I can't right now. I can't. And I knew when she told me I can't, I knew what was going to happen. Now, I could have said, guys, I really appreciate it. Thanks. I don't want the $300,000 a year job. I don't want this. I don't want that. I'm going to stay here with my wife and do what I'm doing, because I was already making money here. I didn't need that. But I thought that was going to complete who I was. I thought that was my answer. And unfortunately, that wasn't the answer. And I knew before I left, and probably within 4 months, I had met a girl, and my son wasn't even born yet. And I'm thinking, what are you? You only care about you. You only care about you. And this girl had a little girl, and she was adorable with her little glasses on. And I told myself, well, you didn't really love this other one. You were just, she just was there, and, and I picked up the phone one day, and I said, hey, I've met somebody else. I'm very sorry. I know you're pregnant. I said, I was so guilt-ridden, and rightfully so. I said, you can have everything. I'll give you everything, because we had some real estate and some cash and a bunch of other stuff. And I just said, you can have it all. I said, I'll pay you. And I gave her a very nice monthly for our son and everything. And I thought, well, I did that, so I'm a good guy. Or at least that's what I told myself. I'm a good guy. Or I'm doing the right thing. I've done a wrong thing, but I'm doing the right thing. And maybe there's a grain of truth in that. But primarily, I'm a selfish guy, and I'm just buying my way or doing what I can afford to do get what I want. And that's when I started to really hit a low, because shortly after that, my son was born. I saw him, and I realized what a mistake I had made. What I had done and what I had replicated in his life that I had done to me. Now, I wasn't saying I don't want anything to do with you or anything. Matter of fact, I was saying the exact opposite. So I did that, and I truly did. To this day, I adore him. I texted him, call him literally probably a couple times a week. There's not always a response there, but I adore him. But I realized I put that in motion. Where my son is today, I put that in motion. I started that down. I started him down that path. I started him, down there. So that marriage came to an end. It was extremely difficult for her and consequently for him. Got married again, now the third marriage. And a good, kind person, but flawed like myself. And I was sure that this is time, it's going to work. I will do everything. I'm doing exactly the same thing, but I'm going to get a different result. And we all know what that's called, right? So I'm going to do the same thing but get a different result. That's insanity. So that went down the road, and it was very, very, very bumpy, very painful, I think, for all of us concerned. That being said, it was the first time I can tell you I genuinely loved something. I did. I genuinely loved her. Again, that was, I'm sure, a very selfish thing on my behalf, but it was something that I truly wanted. So I did, and I had the pain was, still throbbing, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. So what happens is we have a child together. And most of you know my daughter Milan, who, again, I'm pretty stupid about. All three of them, Chelsea, Nino, and Milan, I adore those three kids like crazy. And I'm very proud of them, even though they're not all doing what I would love them to do. In spite of that, I'm very proud of them, in spite of, having me as a dad. Well, I'm just being honest. I could tell you a different story, but it wouldn't be the real story. So we have Milan. I'm looking at this little creature and just going, wow. And as a little girl, she was gorgeous. And I mean, everybody who saw her thought she was, just like, wow, And for a moment, I started really looking at myself and going, I need to make some changes. Didn't want to make them, but I knew I had to make some changes. So, started on that path, and did terribly. Didn't do good at all, because the changes, I didn't have anybody there to say, hey, you're not, it's like dyslexia in a way. The reason nobody knows somebody else has dyslexia is because nobody can see through my eyes. Nobody can see through my eyes and say, hey, you know what? You're not seeing that right. That's actually a P, not a B. That's this. And at that point, I had nobody there to look through my eyes or hold me accountable. You got to remember, 16 on, Tony's on his own. And nobody's there to hold Tony accountable. Nobody's there to say, hey, what you're doing is kind of dumb, man. Have you ever thought about doing it this way? Have you ever thought about doing it that way? And so I didn't have that. I didn't have that at all. At that point, my stepfather and my biological father both die within 6 months of each other. So I'm feeling even more, even though there's not a lot of contact, well, there's no contact basically with my biological father. There is a point where I go to see him and understand everything. Doesn't mean I fix everything, but I understand everything. I start to really understand it. And the part that I understand is my dad had a hard life. My dad made a lot of bad decisions. I don't think that he necessarily did not love his children. I think he was just further down the road than I was at that time. And by his standards, compared to his father, he probably thought he was doing better than his dad. And of course, me, I'm thinking, well, hell, I've done amazingly better. I'm like a superstar. But I know that's not true. But those are the lies we tell ourselves. I know it's not true. I'm a superstar. My dad, threw me across the room. I never wanted you. Woo. I never wanted you. And I understand who my dad was because he experienced, I'm sure, the same things. And when I saw him, it was after 30 years, and he was crying. First thing he did was just cry. He just bawled. He goes, I don't even know why you want to see me. I don't even know why you want to see me. And I said, well, you're my dad. You gave me life. I have your name. We got the same name, Pop. And the saving grace, I guess, I have from him was he knew he was a sinner. He knew it. So he passed on some bad stuff. We all do. But he did pass on something that he knew he was a sinner. Now, he was also a very selfish guy, which I also got that, and a bunch of other things. But he had such remorse in that moment. I can't speak to afterwards. And I went there, and my brother went with me. I got us tickets, and I flew us there, and we met him. And all we both talked about, my brother more so than me, was how we were going to beat him up. How we were going to pay him back. I was going to pay my dad back. Now, I wanted to pay him back, but it was going to be more of a verbal beating. My brother was like, I'm going to, literally, he was saying crazy stuff. We got there, saw him, and felt sorry for him. Immediately, I went from, I'll say this about you, and I'll say that, and I'll do this. And immediately, I had compassion for him. I truly, my heart just broke for him. Because he had gone through 70-something years of life and had such regrets and remorse. And even if that was just the only part in his life where he got a break, was somebody saying, hey, you're my dad. I forgive you. And I would probably not have been able to say that if it was earlier in life, but I'd already made all these mistakes, and I said, how pathetic am I? How bad? And I could see, and it never changed the sadness that I went through, but I could understand who he was. I could see who he was, and I could see he was destroyed. And that was, and even my brother who wanted to beat him up didn't lay a finger on him. My brother teased him and harassed him a little bit, but it was more playful. And in a lot of ways, it was a healing moment for us. And I thank God. At that point, I really thanked God for it. And I said, Dad, I said, I don't know why God has done this the way He's done it. But I'm so happy that I got to see you as an adult. And he told me how happy that he was proud that I was this and proud that I was that, and I said, well, that's all great, and I'm glad it gives you that. But what I want you to know is, I'm glad that I'm your son, and for that moment, he was okay. he was all right in that moment. And I never saw him again after that. Unfortunately, as I said, they both passed away within 6 months of each other. And I was again alone, or at least I felt alone again. So I have nobody, no recourse. I can't pick up a phone and, hey, what do you think about this? Hey, I have no guidance. My daughter Chelsea was having problems in school, and it was becoming an issue. Again, she had a couple of winners, I say that jokingly, as parents, and we're trying to figure out why she's got problems. It couldn't be us. So lastly, what we do is we go and we start looking for a private school. And that private school wound up being Lighthouse. Lighthouse. Woo! Lighthouse, yes, amen. Lighthouse. So Lighthouse, Amanda and oh my gosh. Well, Amanda had found this, and the reason we chose this school was, and of course I'm going to forget his name right now. He was an assistant pastor here. Mike, what was Mike's last name? Mike Lynch. There you go. God bless you. Boy, I'm getting old. Mike Lynch was also from Indiana. And my wife said, that's got to be a sign. And I said, how much does it cost? And she said, it's like ridiculous. It's like $500 or $600 a month. I said, praise the Lord, we're going to school there. I said, that's where she's going. So I haven't been in church in quite a while. I haven't been in church in probably 20 years. My daughter's going to school here. One day, my daughter comes home from school and says, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, can we go to church next Sunday? Now, this is 3 months into it. And I'm like, oh, boy. Oh, boy. And I'm a mess, and so is she. We're both a mess. And I said, we're going to go to church. We're going to go to church. So we got dressed up. We came in, and Chelsea, Nino, and Milan with us, and we sat down. I think we sat down right in that pew you're sitting in, young fella, right there, as a matter of fact. I wanted to be kind of in the middle, because I always sat up here when my dad was preaching. So I said, no, I'm not sitting up front. I'll sit in the middle so we can escape, and we won't have to talk to anybody. We won't, we'll just go in and we'll go out. Chelsea will be happy, and we'll go in and we'll go out, and it'll be okay. And then, of course, God walks in. Again, God's always there. It's just, I'm going to recognize, I see you now. Okay. We either take our glasses off or put them on, or whatever your analogy is there. And Rob gave a sermon. Our wonderful pastor Rob gave a sermon. And it really got to me. And I just said, I need to start, I have to start this changing. I have to start. I don't even remember what the sermon was about. I remember walking out of here and wanting to just fly out of here prior to that. But I said, no, Amanda, I just want to stop and talk to the pastor for a second. I just shook his hand and said, thank you so much. That sermon spoke to me. I'm sure it spoke to a bunch of other people. We'll be back. We'll be coming back. And so we came back next Sunday. And this kind of just shows you how you can hear what you want to hear. You can accept what you want to accept. A lot of us want to go through life. Me especially, go through life like it's a buffet and pick out the pieces we want. the next week, he had another sermon that was fairly good, but he started bum blah bum 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 blah blah blah, and I was like, "What the heck is going on?" Because I didn't hear this in the sermon before, and I was like, "Holy moly!" And I was like, and I grew up in South Florida again. I'll preface this with this. We have, Buddy knows this, we have snake handlers there and people that speak in tongues. And my dad said, do not be a part of that. He goes, listen, and one wonderful thing Barry taught me was, look at what we have in common. Let's not look at the things that will divide us. If we have a common, what do we have in common? Do you believe Christ died on the cross? Da, 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 da. Yeah. But my dad prefaced it like, that's not going to be a good thing if you wind up there. So I hear him, and he's doing a good job. He's really, he's getting it. And guess what happened? I got angry because I thought I had found a place, a home. I was going to be safe again. And that's the way Satan plays his game. And I got angry. And I got real angry. So again, I stopped on the way out of the service, and I grabbed Robbie's hand, but this time I didn't grab it exactly the same way. And I grabbed his hand, and I looked him in the eye, and I squeezed his hand as hard as I possibly could. And I said, I'll never come back to this place again. And walked off. I'll never come back to this place again, and just walked off. Didn't say a word, didn't wait for a response, took my family and left. Thinking seriously, like, I probably should pull my kid out of this school. I probably should pull my kid out of this school. This is not good. I had turned it from this amazing thing in a week's time into something diabolical, something evil. I wonder what that was. Maybe it was fear again. Yeah, definitely it was fear. I was fearing something, and I was angry again. Something was taken away from Tony, that he thought he had something good, and Tony was angry. I'm gonna finish this up because the story will just take too long, but I told Rob that, and I meant it when I said it. And I felt an immediate loss as soon as I had done it. And I had went home and prayed and asked God to change my life. This is literally what I said. I need you to change my life. So he did. So the next week, on Sunday, I have a little golf tournament that I used to run at the VA. And I did it for the veterans. I'm a veteran, so I had this tournament. And as golfers, we have bets. We make little wagers with everybody. Well, generally the guys I played with like to wager a little higher and this and that. And there was a guy named, not you, Charlie, but there was a guy named Charlie who I'd been playing with for 10 years. And Charlie lost a sizable amount of money to me. And Charlie had always paid me, and vice versa. I had always paid him. It's an understanding. And this week, I saw Charlie, as I'm announcing who the winners are and this and that. Charlie's walking away to his car. And I say, hey, Charlie, don't forget to pay me before you leave. And Charlie looks at me and goes, like that. And I'm like, So I run over to Charlie and say, hey, buddy, don't forget to pay me because I'm not paying you. Now at this golf tournament, my kids went to this every week with me because they would either like carry my clubs or whatever. And Charlie, told me at that point, I'm not going to pay you. I said, come on, Charlie, I mean, quit joking around. Just pay me and, He goes, I'm not paying you, and started to walk away from me. Well, I was really mad. Now, you got to remember, I had just started coming to Lighthouse, and I had just said, I need you to change my life. Now, he changes certain people's lives in, I'd say, normal ways, but he changed mine in a very dramatic way. I would say that because I had dealt with pain and anger most of my life, I had a very high threshold for pain. There's certain people who can run their head into a wall one time and go, ow, I've had enough. There's others that hit it 5 times. There's others that hit it 20. There's others that hit it 100. I was more in that 100 range because I had my mother telling me, you need to quit being angry. You need to quit being violent. Anyway, Charlie didn't pay me. I beat Charlie to a pulp in the parking lot of a golf course. I took Charlie unconscious and opened his car door and slammed his head in a car door 2 or 3 times. Now, I had already come to this church. I had already said I need to change my life. I'd already said all those things. And then I have this prayer and I say, hey, God, change my life. And I'm sitting on top of Charlie now, literally sitting on top of him in the parking lot. He's unconscious. And I'm still hitting Charlie. And I hear wailing, crying. I hear wailing. And I look behind me, and I see 3 little people. I see Chelsea, I see Nino, and I see Milan. And they're huddled together, leaning against this big black Ford SUV that I had. And all 3 of them are screeching. It would be wonderful if I told you that was the first time that I had ever heard that from them. This wasn't the first time they had seen me do insanity to others. And I look at them and I said again, I'm not doing anything wrong in my head. I'm not doing anything wrong. He's the wrong guy. He didn't want to pay me what he owes me. He's the bad guy. You just don't understand. And I get ready to punch him again. And I hear this. Like I said, I had this high threshold for pain. You could hurt me, but I could withstand it. You could say things to me, but I could withstand it. You could physically hurt me, but I could withstand it. But I didn't realize that there was something I couldn't withstand. Because I heard a voice, and I heard it. It wasn't like, oh, it wasn't anything like that. It was very, very monotone, and it said, they're going to be just like you. I didn't hear it 2 or 3 times. I heard it once. It wasn't something that was in my head that I heard. I heard it in my ears. They're going to be just like you. And that was the thing that God used to change my life. I picked Charlie up. I put him in his car. I made sure he was okay. He wasn't okay, but I made sure he was okay. Called the paramedics. They came. Truly was a miracle because Charlie refused to press charges against me. I picked my kids up. I put them in the car. I cried the whole way home. I told them that that they would never see their dad do that ever again. And thank God, that's almost 20 years ago almost. I think 19 years ago, because Milan was probably like 2.5. They haven't. And I had never had to do that again. God changed me with pain. He hit me where I didn't think I could be hit. And immediately, everything came flooding back. I'm like my dad, and they're going to be just like me. That was the pain that I couldn't say, yeah, I'll keep going. When I realized that they would grow up like me, that was the pain that made me stop. And thank God he took such a radical way to do it, because I can only imagine the damage that I would have created for so many others and for my children. I know that they still suffer from some of those wounds, but I know God is a loving and forgiving God. And I know that they will, at some point, serve him in the way that will make him grateful and their dad as well. Thank you all for listening. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful day. God bless you all.